Welcome to the world of 3D printing. In this video, we will introduce you to the Creality Ender 5 Plus 3D printer and the Ultimaker Cura software. The Creality Ender 5 Plus 3D printer can create three-dimensional prints by melting plastic filament into patterns generated by the computer. Using 3D graphics software, you can design just about anything and print it into a working 3D model for decorations, prototypes, or just about any purpose you can imagine. The printer works with many types of plastic that melt at a variety of temperatures. I would recommend you start with PLA plastic, as this is the most versatile to work with. The 3D printer is located in the radio facility in the Trustees Building. It is housed in the Corner Edit Suite. The printer is controlled by a dedicated computer device that can be accessed by any workstation. I highly recommend you operate the system with the workstation in the room. Before printing, make it a point to choose your print color. If you do not see a color you want, let us know and we'll try to get it for you. The printer holds one spool of filament at a time. For convenience, the printer is set up with work lights and a camera. All functions for the printer can be handled through the Up the Printhead software.
Okay, this part of the training session will show you how to use the software portion of the 3D printer. And you'll find that, it is a little bit complicated, but it does in fact work. And so we're going to start by assuming that we already have something to 3D print. Okay, so here we are in the modeler interface. Now remember, the modeler interface is the only one we need to worry about if we're doing 3D printing. If we're doing any other type of object, we would immediately want to go to layout. We're not actually going to touch layout at all. So here we have, if you look here, a model of a chess piece. And you can see it there. And so this is the 3D model that we're going to send to the printer. And now it's actually incredibly easy in many ways because all we're really doing is sending it out. Now the first thing I want you to note is that we're only using one layer. Your object has got to be contained in one layer. And if it isn't, all you got to do is save the layers down to one layer by going into the file, save layers as objects, and then select all the layers and save them that way. Then open them up as a single layer. And so there you go. This is our single layer king. And so what I want to do is I want to save this, or I want to export it rather, out of here as a different kind of file. And so remember, Lightwave only understands Lightwave files unless you import something or export it. So in this case, we're going to export as an STL file. Now, STL files are what the 3D printer really likes. And so we're just going to go ahead and say OK. And so you see we have this area we're going to put it, and I'm going to call it King. Now once I've done that, then nothing seems to have happened here, and that's because we're done with this program. The next program we're going to go into is Ultimaker, and this is available on the lab computers. It's also going to be available on the computer in the room. And so if you already have your STL file, you can take it into that workstation, or you can open it up, and we're going to show you how we're going to do that in just a second. Okay, so this is Ultimaker. Now, Ultimaker, the way you're going to have access to it, it has the Creality Ender 5 Plus up here as the only machine it knows. Now, this gives you this large, what looks like a fish tank. And if you use your mouse button, you can roll it back. You can see this is as big as you can print. Now, that's actually pretty big. But what we're going to print today is pretty small. And so let's say we wanted to make a print file. You don't have to do much in this program except import it and then tell it to print. So I'm going to import that STL file. And so you can see under the demo folder, which I just made, it's there as king.stl. Now the moment I do that, you can see there is my king. The king has appeared on the platform. Now we're not quite ready to go yet because the king, first of all, it's on its side, and that is not a very good place, a very good way to print the king. The king has a nice flat surface that it stands on. That's what you want to have facing down. It's why it's very difficult to print angular objects that have very few flat surfaces. So we're going to start by turning this king right side up. And so I'm going to go over here. Now in Ultimaker, there's very little controls you need to worry about, and they're all right over here. So once I've selected it, right now it's set to move the king. And so this is important if you're positioning more than one object on the printer at the same time. But I'm going to go to the one below that, which is Scale. And the moment I do that, I get this menu here. Now, right now, the king is smaller than it is supposed to be. Now, this is where the real magic comes in. I'm going to bet that that circular surface in the bottom is the base, which obviously it is. And I'm going to bet that the radius from left to right is the same as from up to down in this case. So that's going to be what that number is coming in. And I happen to know that I want the base of that. In order for it to fit on the board, it has got to be 43 millimeters. So if I type 43 for the millimeters instead of 9, and I click on any of these other values, it will make the king the correct size. Now it looks big, but it really isn't. So now we're going to go over here to the rotation control, and I'm going to grab it by the red axis, and it's set in such a way that it will automatically, take you to the nearest whole number, and sometimes it gets away from you. So I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees, and immediately it will position the king in such a way that his base is flat with the surface. And so then, that's really all I've got to do, unless I want to move him around. But there he is. That's the object. Now it's in a different program other than Lightwave. If you want, you can save it as a project, or the other thing you can do is you can just go ahead and hit the slice. Before we do that, I'm going to show you a few things to watch for. So, if you choose one of the quality settings, you have the ability to change them. Now, for example, you can select any one that happens to be there, but I'm going to stick with super quality for the moment. Now, don't worry about the layer height. If it's 0.12, that's about where it should be. And so what we're going to do is some of these things aren't even going to be on your thing. But if we go down here, there's only a few that I want you to worry about. Ironing might be one. If ironing is there, turn it on. It's always on, so don't worry about that. So the only other ones we have to think about, one would be Infill. And that is the amount of empty space the program leaves inside the printer. And so if you have 100% infill, that means that it's going to fill the object in a completely solid fashion. If you take it to 20%, which we'll leave it at, that will create a honeycomb pattern of airspace on the inside. It saves time and plastic. If you want a nice solid piece, you can leave it at 100%, but expect that to take longer to print. Now, the only other thing that comes up is under materials, oddly enough, we have our temperature settings. And to understand this, you have to understand that the printhead has to be over 200 degrees, 210, 220. It can be as low as 180 working with the PLA plastic, but that's really up to you. So set it between 180 and 200. If there's a problem, you can change the setting. But I leave it at basically 200, 220. Now your build plate should be at 75 for PLA. So that's the surface here is going to get to 75 degrees Celsius. That's Celsius, not Fahrenheit. So don't touch the printhead. It's at basically twice the boiling point of water. And over here, that is pretty much all you're going to have to worry about. Except if you run into, I'm just going to check and make sure this is set right. Under cooling, make sure that cooling is enabled if you're working with PLA. If you're working with other plastics, it might not be a problem. And then the last thing that you're going to want to look at is going to be the plate adhesion. And right now I have it set on raft. Raft is really the best way to go with PLA. That way it'll have a nice solid place to sit while it's being printed. And you'll see what that means in a minute. Okay, so we are going to say that that is fine. Then if you hit the slice button down here, it will make all the necessary slices in that piece. And it takes a few moments. And then when you do that, notice this will take 6 hours to print. If I hit preview, you can see what it's doing. So if you roll this down, this is what it's going to print it like. Now this particular program doesn't do 100% good at showing you this, so I'm going to click one of these other views. If we're looking at it from above, you can see what it's going to do. And in this particular case, Infill doesn't come up all that often because the actual piece is solid, but you can see a little bit of a checkerboard in some aspects of it. And so we'll go back to the solid view. And so I'm just going to save this to disk, and I'm just going to put that into the demo area, and I'm just going to call this king_print, and that will do it. And then that is the program that you take to the 3D printer. Now here we are at the computer where you're going to be printing on. And so this is the computer inside the lab. This is the best one to use. And so this is also the same settings that you'll use to get access to Ultimaker. So if you hit Control-Alt-Delete, you will get this. Now you want video edit. For some reason it has my name down as a possible user. Only use video edit for your login name. And that applies whether you're going into Ultimaker or whether you're actually going into the 3D printer. Then type edit 2015. And that will log you into the network. And so here we are in the network. And to operate the 3D printer, you basically have to use the browser, because the browser is going to be connected to the computer that operates the 3D printer, which is a little tiny computer. And so open up your, in this case it's Microsoft Edge, and you should have right there, if you just hit HTTP, https://octopi.local, and that's going to reach out to this. Now this logs into the computer that operates the 3D printer, and that computer's name is Ramo with a capital R. Now the password is always Ramo 2021. And then if you hit login, you will get into this. So that's Ramo 2021. And then you should get a screen that looks pretty much like this. And if you've got notices there, you can just either put later or whatever. And so right now, if it's blank, if it says connect, just hit connect and it should work. Normally it's already connected, but if it's not, just hit connect and it'll say operational, generally speaking. And so that means the thing is right. So looking at this, and it's still, it's giving you temperature readings. Looking at this, if I go to Control, look at these tabs here. Control takes me to an image of the 3D printer, which there's something in the window there. But right now, the first thing we want to do is change colors. And so in order to do that, the first thing we have to do is actually turn on the printer. Now, it's important that you understand that the printer, even if I go to Control and I can see the print bed, the printer is not available to me unless this is on. And there's a very important reason for that. The printer gets very hot, and so we want to shut off any possibility of power going to the heating elements if we're not using it. So to turn on the printer, which you must do first, click on that icon. Now it's no longer grayed out, and if you're in the print room, you should hear it turn on. Now we also have a light bulb icon here, which will allow you to light up the room if in fact the room is dark. So if the light bulb's on, the little yellow thing is there, you can turn it off. And since there are already lights on in the room, you don't see that as much. But what we want to do now is we want to get the correct color. And so I'm going to go back to temperature, and we're going to heat up the printhead. Now to do that, if you'll notice here, that's the tool temperature. I'm going to go here and set this for, I'm going to set it up at 210. That'll get it nice and hot. And then you see it puts a marker up there, and you should begin to see a rise in temperature. If you look here, it's actually going up very quickly. It goes up like a graph, and that is going to heat up that tool so that we can change the color.
The filament spool is located on the far side of the printer right next to the wall. You'll see that the filament from the spool goes up through a motor system before threading into the printhead. To unload the printhead, you must disengage the clutch, which drives the filament through the system. Then spool it off with your other hand. This is not necessarily easy. When you have removed the old spool, please take the time to thread the filament through the loop to keep it from being messy. Now, put in the new color. Make sure that the filament coming off the spool is facing you and not the wall. Then, thread it into the small hole on the bottom of the filament sensor and guide it through the upper mechanism, again using the clutch to let it go through. As you slide the filament in, you should be able to see it travel through the straw to the printhead itself. Only push it until you feel it rest on the printhead. Then you are done.
And if we wanted to load our King Print program, you have to scroll down to see that it's not there, and you hit the upload button. Those are the available prints. And there's King Print. And if we bring that in, it will load it in. And then you would just hit that, and that would set it up, and then you'll see that you get your general specifications. And I'm going to do a couple of things here. One of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on time lapse, because I want to make sure we can see a nice time lapse of that when it's finally printed. And so then I go back to control. Now here, I would just go ahead and hit print. And then if I go back to temperature, you see that now it has established the parameters that we have in the file. So it's going to give us a temperature of 75 degrees for the build plate, and that's going to take a few seconds for it to reach. As you can see, it's almost to temperature now, and when the build plate reaches the proper temperature, the computer will start the heating process for the printhead, which as you can see is up to 220 degrees, which won't take the printhead very long to reach. The build plate is much larger. The printhead is it's got a very small area that it needs to keep hot, and so that can happen much faster. And it reaches a point where it's got to fine-tune it so the temperature will go down slightly, but then it will come back up to temperature. You see it's made a little loop like that here as well. And once we reach that temperature, we can go to control, and we can see that the system is beginning to operate. The build plate will rise to meet the printhead. You see that little bitty piece of plastic there, and the light comes on. That guides the, that's so that the system knows where the build plate is in relation to the printhead. And then it will prime the printhead.
And that's it. When the model is finished, just be sure to allow the system to cool down. You will see the temperature drop. As a general rule, just make sure the printhead is cooler than the build plate before you shut down. Go to the Control tab and turn off the light. Then turn off the printer itself. Confirm and you will see it gray out. Enjoy!